When you walk into Silent Hill 2's apartment level for the very first time, the droning of the fog and the weird screeches and skitters of James Sunderland's monsters are completely drowned out. Once that front door shuts, the only thing you can hear are your own footsteps. When you walk into Bluebird Team's Silent Hill 2's apartment level for the first time, it felt very different. The original's uncomfortable silence is replaced with ambient music that's a little louder than I'd like, and the level itself is weirdly well lit. In the transition from a quote-unquote janky PS2 classic to a modern, more accessible game added to the stack of great ones we seem to have been getting lately, I think while it does accomplish what it set out to do, we shouldn't just go out and write the original off as an inferior experience. It's a different one, and one that I still prefer. The original Silent Hill 2 has its issues, ones that I have no problem talking about, but there's a lot of magic packed into that silly little PS2 disc, and I think some of it was lost in the transition. Overall, though, it's obvious that Bloober not only has a lot of love for this game, but the confidence shown in their rendition of it is really impressive. Firstly, the level design is incredible. I think the apartments and the hospital are solid interpretations of the originals, but the second half of this game is where they're in their bag. The prison finally brings back that pitch black vibe that I missed so much in the first two levels. The ambient noise is still there, but it sounds less and less like music and more like James has a pounding headache, and I love it. The level itself is the confusing dive into James's subconscious that we all love, but it lightens up on the puzzles and the more involved navigation we've gotten used to, so we can just enjoy the terrifying ride. Holy fuck. I'm inclined to say that the hotel is one of the best individual levels I've played in a video game in a very long time. The lock and key gameplay loop Silent Hill is so good at is at its very best here. There's a flow you get into here, and the game applies just enough friction to keep it interesting. I got stuck and I had to think, but it never got frustrating like the original did. I'm glad they weren't afraid to overhaul the combat either. I would totally agree with the argument that it doesn't play to the original's normal guy angle and that Remake James might even be a little cracked here, but I kinda don't care. He has animation canceling, man. This shit is sick. It really makes you feel like you're beating a woman over the head with a rusty pipe. In the transition from the PS1 to the PS2, the industry was still trying to figure out what it meant to make a three-dimensional game. The PlayStation 2 was leaps and bounds more capable than its predecessor, and the scale of Team Silent grew to compensate. The problems this situation imposed on development is another conversation, but what we got was a horror game pre-Resident Evil 4 with all of its quirks and direction that made it a product of its time, with the same amount of technical capability that Shinji Mikami and his team over at Capcom would eventually use to revitalize and standardize not only the genre of horror, but damn near every game that followed in its footsteps. Silent Hill 2 is one of, if not the best, technological executions on that old formula. Its fixed camera angles and tank controls and pre-rendered cutscenes stayed, while the production value jumped a ridiculous amount. The entire experience itself is one that's very special to me, and I don't think it lands quite the same way in the remake. I was wrongfully dismissive of fixed camera angles in my other video. While it is a product of its time, its effectiveness and creative applications transcend those limitations. I've seen the same sentiment from certain people, specifically Yahtzee, where he says that you've taken something unique and made it like everything else in his review. Fixed camera angles weren't exactly unique back then, but the amount of over-the-shoulder, fully controllable camera schemes are much less so now. Nearly every single AAA game is this way, and for that reason, I don't think it's as scary. It's not even close. You could attribute some of this to the fact that I still have really clear memories of the OG. Rounding the corner and seeing Pyramid Head for the first time didn't hit as hard because I knew it was coming. But the original Silent Hill 2 knew exactly what it wanted me to see. But more importantly, it knew exactly what it didn't. Additionally, it just wasn't as dark, and it wasn't as uncomfortably quiet. Being made for a console with 20 years of technological advancements sounds great, but any side-by-side comparison makes the diminishing returns very clear. The PS2 was powerful enough to clearly show the intentions of the art on screen, but it wasn't enough to render these intentions in a way that showed us every little detail. Which isn't a bad thing at all. The implied nature of Silent Hill 2's visuals is what made it such a good horror game. Fear of the unknown is a basic human response. You can show me every skin flap and drop of blood on a monster's body, but it'll never be as uncomfortable as seeing something like this and filling in the cracks with your imagination. Even the artists behind the pre-rendered cutscenes knew this. They're made exclusively to bring more life to the character interactions and give us more insight to what they're feeling. In a time where in-game graphics look just as good as their cutscenes, leaping from an older console's meager capabilities to a cutscene that's pre-rendered or even hand-drawn just really grabs your attention. After nearly working himself to death animating every single frame of Silent Hill 1's cutscenes by himself, Takeyoshi Sato and his team at the newly founded Sato Works aim to give Silent Hill 2 an equivalent leap in quality in its pre-rendered cutscenes that the jump to a new console generation offered the in-game visuals. What we got were some of the most captivating and dread-inducing amalgamations of pixels I've ever seen. Like I said before, they're only used during these important character interactions. I can't stress enough how important these are to the overall experience. Remake's cutscenes are now like everything else too, and I can easily say that none of them capture me like the other technically worse looking ones did, especially in the rare instance where the more pivotal moments miss the landing. This cutscene embodies almost every complaint I have towards this game. It's poorly acted and completely misses the emotional beats the original meant to get across. Look at the frustration building up in Maria's face. How do you miss such a wonderful detail like this? Her manipulative undertone at the end is nowhere to be found in this stilted, boring new version of this character. I think the remake's cutscenes usually do a great job at recreating the surreal, awkward dialogue of the original, but this one felt like a rough first take, or they just didn't have enough time to finish animating it. I like this game. I do, and I'm not gonna let the overly critical person I'm becoming convince me that it's bad, because it's not. A few people from Team Silent have come forward and expressed their thoughts on the remake. The director, Masashi Sugiyama, has expressed his excitement for it, mentioning how he thinks the new camera perspective is a great change and laments the limitations of the era the original was created in. A lot of people ran with this quote like it was proof that the remake was superior and that any criticism was now invalid. And I gotta ask, why does his opinion matter, specifically? Why does a work of art that so sturdily stands on its ability to be interpreted differently by anyone who plays it suddenly knocked off of that foundation when one guy has an opinion on it? Masahiro Ito, another key member, initially rejected the idea of a remake. He said he liked it the way it was, but he ended up hopping on board once he realized that the remake would happen with or without him. Sato, at least 16 years ago, believed that the technical limitations didn't matter. It's what you do within them that matters. Are their opinions any more or less important than the director's? I don't know these people, and their opinions very well may have changed. But if they did, I still wouldn't care.